I pulled the snowmobile away from the lookout just after Evelyn missed her second weather check-in. The cold was 14 degrees below zero, and the wind pushed ice against my face hard enough that I had to turn my head whenever the trail opened up. The radio on my chest kept making small plastic noises under my coat, but there was nobody else to call from the ridge. Alt Creek was 40 minutes down the switchback road, assuming the road was passable, and the road had been buried for several weeks. Evelyn's cabin was closer than town, although closer still meant crossing a stretch of forest where the snow had covered the trail markers and the drifts leaned across the path. I kept thinking she might have gone outside without her radio, or that the battery had died, or that she had decided to ignore the schedule for some ordinary reason. People missed check-ins. They got distracted, fell asleep, or found something more important than reporting the temperature every hour. I had done it myself, though not twice in a row during a storm. The cabin appeared between the trees with its front door standing open. I slowed the machine and stopped several yards away. Snow had collected along the porch steps, but the doorway was clear. I looked at the windows first. Nothing moved behind them, and there was no light inside. The cabin seemed less abandoned than interrupted, which was worse. I took my rifle from the rack and walked up to the porch. "Evelyn?" I called. The open doorway gave me no answer. I waited another few seconds, listening to the wind scrape over the roof, and then stepped inside. The wood stove was still warm. It wasn't hot enough to burn, but I felt the warmth on my face as I passed. A pot sat near the counter with coffee frozen halfway between the pot and the cup. A dark brown ridge caught in the middle of the pour. Her boots were beside the door. Her coat hung from its hook, with the gloves tucked into one sleeve. Her keys rested on the small table beneath the window. I checked the rest of the room before touching anything. There was no blood on the floor or the counter. The chairs were where they belonged. The table had not been knocked over, and nothing looked like it had been searched in a hurry. The door latch was intact. Evelyn had not packed a bag, put on her coat, or taken the keys she would need to get anywhere. I had known Evelyn long enough to know she did not leave in house shoes when the temperature was 14 below zero. She would not leave the door open behind her unless she expected to come back before the room cooled. I walked through the small bedroom and checked beneath the bed, then the washroom and the pantry. I called her name once more, quieter this time. The only answer came from the stove, which settled with a soft metal click. I went back outside. The porch stood about 40 feet from the tree line. Between the steps and the trees, the snow had formed one smooth sheet, without a break in it. There were no tracks leading away from the cabin, and no tracks coming toward it. I leaned over the railing and checked beneath both sides of the porch, where the snow had been blown into shallow hollows. There were no prints there either. That bothered me more than the open door. A person could walk out of the cabin without taking the road, but they still had to step somewhere. They would leave a boot mark, a heel, a place where the snow had compressed under them. I circled the cabin, keeping close to the wall. The snow was banked high against the north side, almost to the bottom of the windows, but the eaves were still visible above it. I looked up because the wall seemed damaged. 3 shallow gouges ran across the logs, parallel to one another. They were high above the drift line, higher than my head, and each one cut through the dark pitch between the logs. I reached up with my gloved hand and stopped before touching them. A clump of coarse gray hair had frozen into the pitch beside the marks. I stood there for a while, looking at it. There was not enough of it to identify an animal, and no animal I knew of could have made those marks that high on the wall without leaving tracks beneath them. I took my field camera from its case and photographed the gouges from several angles, then pulled a maintenance envelope from my pack. The hair came loose with a little piece of frozen pitch attached to it. I put the whole thing in the envelope and folded the top over twice before sliding it into my coat pocket. Then I radioed Rowan. The static came first, followed by his flat voice.
Go ahead.
I found Evelyn's cabin, I said.
I already know which cabin you found.
I looked back at the open doorway. The dark interior was visible over my shoulder, and the stove was still giving off heat behind the walls. You knew before I gave you the address? There was a pause, though not a long one.
Leave her belongings undisturbed,
he said.
Bring the photographs to Alt Creek. Put the disappearance in the radio log as an exposure walk-off.
I looked down at the envelope in my pocket and then at the clean snow beyond the porch. When will the search party start?
The weather makes a search pointless.
She left her boots inside.
I need you to bring the photographs to town and let me handle the report.
There are no tracks.
That doesn't change the weather.
It changes what happened. Rowan's voice got quieter, which usually meant he had finished asking and started ordering.
You will leave Evelyn's belongings where they are. You will bring the photographs to Alt Creek. The report will say, exposure walk-off.
I kept the radio close to my mouth, but I didn't answer right away. The wind moved over the roof and sent a fine spray of snow across the porch. Behind me, Evelyn's front door remained open, and the warm cabin waited with her coat on the hook and her keys on the table. I'll bring the photographs, I said.
Good. I will handle the report myself.
The transmission clicked off, and I closed the radio. It took me almost 2 hours to get back to the lookout, mostly because the wind had covered the trail again and I had to stop twice to find the markers. By then the light was gone from the trees, and the cold had settled into my gloves and the front of my coat. Evelyn's next check-in was still marked on the calendar beside the radio desk. The time had passed by several hours, but I left the mark where it was. I set the envelope of gray hair beside my rifle, took off my gloves, and sat down to write. I didn't use the report form Rowan had asked for. I used one of the lined field notebooks I kept under the desk, the kind meant for weather observations and equipment problems. I wrote down the open door, the warm stove, the coffee frozen halfway into the cup, and the boots that had never left the cabin. I wrote that there were no tracks in the snow. I wrote about the gouges on the wall and the hair caught in the pitch. I wrote that the marks were higher than my head and that I hadn't found any tracks beneath them. I wrote the phrase exposure walk-off at the bottom of the page, then crossed it out. The phrase didn't match what I had found. It was a clean phrase for an unclean scene, and I didn't want it attached to my notes. I put the notebook in my pack and carried the photographs down to Alt Creek. The snowmobile was loud in the dark, and the engine noise filled up the spaces where I would usually have been thinking. Evelyn had not taken her coat. Rowan had known the address before I gave it to him. There had been no tracks. The constable's office was still lit when I pulled up. Rowan was behind the desk with his coat hanging on the chair, looking through a ledger that had been opened to the middle. He didn't ask how the ride had been.
Put the photographs there,
he said. I set them on the corner of his desk. I need to see the report for Francis Rice. Rowan looked at me for a few seconds, then closed the ledger halfway.
You don't need that report.
Francis disappeared 3 days ago.
That was recorded as an exposure walk-off.
I pulled the ledger toward me before he could close it. The entry was written in Rowan's block handwriting. Francis Rice. Cabin below the East Ridgeline. Exposure walk-off. No search sent. The words sat on the page in the same order he had used for Evelyn. Why wasn't there a search? I asked.
The weather made one pointless.
The weather was bad 3 days ago.
The weather is bad every day right now.
I read the entry again. The ink had dried, but the page beneath it was clean. There was no list of men assigned to search, no route, no equipment, and no time written in the margin. There wasn't even a note saying that a search had been considered. Show me his photographs. Rowan shut the ledger.
There are no photographs.
You took some.
I inspected the cabin.
You told me to bring photographs for the report.
I told you to bring the photographs you took of Evelyn's cabin.
Then show me yours. His face didn't change, but his hand stayed flat on the ledger.
I need you to leave Francis Rice's belongings undisturbed.
His cabin was open.
Yes.
The chimney was smoking.
Yes.
There were no tracks around it. Rowan watched me carefully now. He had the same expression he used when giving instructions over the radio, as if keeping his voice flat made the order reasonable.
You will not add wall damage to the official report,
He said. Was there wall damage?
That isn't part of the report.
Did you see it?
I inspected the cabin.
I picked up the photographs from his desk and put them back in my pack. The ledger remained between us. Francis had the same kind of scene, I said. Rowan's eyes moved toward the office window. It was dark outside, and the glass reflected both of us back into the room.
Exposure walk-off.
He said.
That is the official finding.
I left before he could tell me to leave. The store was still open across the road, with yellow light shining through the front windows and a row of shovels propped beside the door. I went inside because I needed food, though I wasn't hungry enough to care what I bought. There were 4 people near the counter, all talking quietly. The conversation dropped when I came in, then started again in pieces. A paper bag of flour sat open beside the register, and the heater near the entrance made a clicking sound every few minutes. Keith was standing near the back shelves with one hand on a basket. I knew him from the valley, though we had never talked for more than a few minutes at a time. He looked older than he had that morning, or maybe the store light just made his face look more hollow. I walked over to him. Why did Rowan know Evelyn's address before I gave it to him? Keith looked toward the front windows, where the dark ridgeline showed faintly through the reflected light. Then he took my arm and pulled me between the shelves, away from the counter.
Keep your voice down,
He said. How did he know? Keith glanced toward the sawtooth ridgeline again. He did that before saying anything important, as though the mountains could hear him if he didn't check first.
3 people disappear from this valley every hard winter. Smart men learned not to look for them.
I looked at him, waiting for the rest of it. He rubbed his thumb along the basket handle and kept his eyes on the window. Who were the other 2?
Francis,
He said.
And the Bowen boy.
I had not heard about the boy. When did he disappear? Keith's mouth tightened.
from his family's cabin.
Was there a search? He didn't answer. I thought about the ledger, the blank space beneath Francis's name, and the way Rowan had already prepared the same words for Evelyn. What takes them? I asked. Keith let go of my arm.
We can't talk about this here.
Then tell me somewhere else.
No.
Why did Rowan know where to go? Keith looked back toward the ridgeline and didn't look away. I could hear the register drawer open and close, followed by the scrape of a paper bag across the wood. Keith lowered his voice.
We've kept the number at 3 for 4 generations. Ask more questions and you put yourself at risk.
What takes people? He didn't answer me. For 3 days I stayed at the lookout and recorded the weather, the road conditions, and the hours when the wind changed direction. I slept with my rifle beside the cot, though I didn't sleep much, and kept the photographs of Evelyn's cabin, the envelope of gray hair, and my private notes in the locked drawer beneath the radio desk. By the afternoon of February 25th, the drawer had started to feel more useful than the official files. Rowan had his ledger, and I had the things he didn't want attached to a report. The radio call came while I was checking the temperature outside. Snow had covered the lower trail again, and I was brushing it away from the marker with one glove when Rowan's voice came through the speaker.
Maurice, I need you at the Bowen cabin.
What happened?
The Bowen boy is missing.
I looked toward the road. The sky was pale and flat over the trees, and the wind had pushed loose snow across the old tracks. How long?
His parents were splitting wood outside. They came back in, and he was gone.
Did they see him leave?
No.
I shut the radio off and went inside for my coat. The trip took longer because the drifts had risen across the switchback, but I kept the machine moving and reached the cabin before the light started to go. Orion's parents were standing beside the woodpile when I arrived. The axe lay in a block of split pine, and several fresh pieces of wood were scattered around their boots. They both looked at me as I climbed off the snowmobile, but neither of them came forward. The front door was open behind them. "How long has he been gone?" I asked. His mother rubbed both hands over the front of her coat.
"We were outside for only a few minutes, dear. We had nearly finished the wood."
"Did he say he was going somewhere?"
"No."
His father looked at the snow between the woodpile and the door.
He couldn't have gone out there.
The snow was smooth from the steps to the trees. No tracks marked the snow near the woodpile or led away from the cabin in any direction. The chimney was smoking steadily, sending a gray line into the still air. I walked inside. The cabin was warmer than the outside air, and the heat made my face ache for a few seconds. Orion's coat was hanging near the stove. His snow boots were beneath it, and one of his mittens sat on the floor with the fingers turned inward. On the table, a wooden duck rested beside a small carving knife. The duck was only half finished. One side had been shaped into a wing, while the other still held the square marks left by the knife. Fresh cuts ran across the wood, and the knife was lying exactly where a small hand had left it, with the handle turned toward the empty chair. I didn't touch it.
"That was what he was making,"
His mother said from the doorway.
"He asked if he could keep working until supper."
I looked at the chair. When did he ask?
Before we went outside.
Did he seem upset? She shook her head.
No, he was quiet, but he was always quiet when he was working.
I searched the rest of the cabin before going back outside. The bed was made, the pantry door was closed, and nothing had been knocked over. I found no blood on the floor or counter, and no sign that anyone had searched the room. The parents followed me around the side of the cabin while I checked beneath it. Snow had risen against the walls above my shoulders, even on the side facing away from the wind. I crouched and looked beneath the lowest gap, using my flashlight to search the dark space under the floorboards. There was no boy beneath the cabin. There was no torn cloth, no mitten, and no place where the snow had been disturbed. I checked the woodshed next. The door opened with a hard shove because snow had packed along the bottom. Split wood filled most of the interior, leaving only a narrow space beside the back wall. I searched that space, then looked behind the stacked logs and beneath the workbench. Nothing. Outside again, I followed the edge of the clearing toward the tree line. The snow had blown away from the cabin all day, just as the radio report had said, but it had gathered high against the walls and around the woodshed. The trees held the same heavy covering as everything else. The snow beneath the trees was unmarked. His father stood near the door, watching me.
Can you find anything?
He asked. There aren't any tracks.
I know there aren't.
His voice sounded tired more than confused. That bothered me. He was looking at the snow like it had confirmed something he already understood. Where would he have gone? I asked. His mother turned toward him.
He wouldn't have gone anywhere without his boots. He could have gone through the woodshed,
the father said, but he didn't sound like he believed it. I checked the path between the cabin and the shed again. The snow was unbroken there too. I had seen the same thing at Evelyn's cabin, The door had been open, the stove was warm, and her boots were still inside. Francis's cabin had been occupied when he vanished as well, with the same clean snow around it. All 3 cabins sat directly below a ridgeline. All 3 had snow banked high against the walls. All 3 chimneys were still smoking when I found them. I radioed Rowan from beside the snowmobile. He answered after a short burst of static.
Go ahead.
I'm at the Bowen cabin.
Did you locate the boy?
No.
Then put the disappearance in the radio log as an exposure walk-off.
I turned toward the cabin. Orion's parents were standing together beneath the open doorway, and the smoke from the chimney moved above them. There are no tracks, I said.
I know the weather conditions.
The snow is unbroken from the door to the tree line.
I need you to keep the Bowen family calm.
They're already calm. Rowan paused. When he spoke again, his voice had gone flat.
Do not alarm them by talking about tracks that don't exist.
I held the radio near my mouth. The tracks don't exist because he didn't leave that way.
You will record the report as an exposure walk-off.
I won't sign that.
You will sign the official report when it reaches you.
I didn't answer him. I closed the radio and went back inside to speak with the parents. They had moved toward the table, but Orion's mother stopped before the carving and kept her hands at her sides. Rowan says it was an exposure walk-off, I told them. His father looked toward the entrance.
He knows it wasn't.
Did he say that?
No.
I returned to the ranger station after dark. The radio log was waiting on the desk when I arrived, with the new entry written beneath the weather reports. Orion Bowen. Exposure walk-off. No search scent. Rowan was sitting across the room, his coat still buttoned.
Sign it.
He said. I read the entry once. Then I read it again. There was no exposure walk-off.
That is the official finding.
There were no tracks. He leaned back in the chair.
You will not bring that up with the Bowen.
I already told them what you wrote.
Then you will stop talking about it.
I picked up the log and folded the page along the edge of the desk. Rowan stood, but he didn't come closer. I folded my unsigned copy of the Bowen radio log and put it inside my jacket. By midday the next day, I had stopped telling Alt Creek what I found. I still radioed the temperature, the wind direction, and the condition of the switchback road, because those were the things they expected from me, and because refusing them would have made the change too obvious. Everything else stayed in my notebooks. The Bowen cabin had no tracks. The 3 cabins had been occupied when the people disappeared. The official reports were false. I wrote those facts down without sending them anywhere. The map took up most of the table beside the radio. I had marked Evelyn's cabin, Francis's cabin, and the Bowen place with small black squares, then added the ridgeline above each one. The wind had been coming from the south for most of the week, but the highest drifts were packed against the north-facing walls. That didn't make sense. I kept checking it anyway, as if the direction might change while I looked at it. The north sides had the deepest snow, and the banks rose high enough to cover the lower windows. The south sides were more exposed, with wind-scoured ground showing through in places. Each cabin sat below a part of the ridge where snow could break loose and bury the walls, but the snow would have had to move against the wind to get there. I drew the same lines 3 times before I was satisfied with them. Then I wrote the wind direction beside each cabin. South wind, north drift. The words looked stupid on the page. I had started making notes about the shape of the drifts when I heard the supply truck below the lookout. It came up the road slowly, tires slipping in the packed snow, and stopped beside the ranger station with a sound that carried through the cold. I put the pencil down and went outside. The driver left a canvas sack near the station door and waved once before turning the truck around. I didn't know him well enough to ask him anything, and he didn't wait for me to try. The truck backed toward the road, its tires throwing loose snow against the building, then disappeared around the bend. I carried the sack inside and sorted through the supplies. Canned food, batteries, lamp oil, and a stack of mail that had been sitting in the station mailbox since the last run. Most of it was addressed to the ranger service, but one envelope had my name written across the front in Ellie's handwriting. I knew it before I turned it over. I took it to the desk and sat down. For a while I only looked at it. The envelope was creased along one edge, and there was a small dark mark near the stamp where somebody's glove had pressed into the paper. It had been a long time since Ellie had written to me instead of calling. The letter was 2 pages. She wrote that she would sign the divorce papers if I returned to Boise in March. She wrote that she would stop waiting for me to come back to the cruise and the life I had left behind. The words were direct, but not cruel. Ellie had never needed cruelty to make a point. She said I couldn't keep using the lookout posting to disappear from everyone. That was the part I read twice. I had told myself the lookout was work. It was work, and I was good at it, but it was also a place where nobody asked me to explain what I was doing with my life. The weather and roads gave me rules to follow, and a missing person gave me facts to write down. None of those things asked me to come home. I put the letter on the desk and looked toward the radio. Ellie wanted an answer about Boise. I had been avoiding that answer for almost a year. The truth was that I would return when the road opened, but I wasn't finished here. I took one of the station sheets from beneath the radio and started writing. I kept the first sentence for a long time before putting it down. Then I wrote that I would return when the road opened. I wrote that I understood what she was asking and that I wasn't asking her to wait without an answer. I didn't write about the gray hair in the envelope beneath the desk. I didn't write about the gray hair in the envelope beneath the desk, the gouges above my head at Evelyn's cabin, or how Rowan had known the address before I ever told him. I didn't write that Alt Creek had refused to search for any of them. I was afraid the letter would be read before it reached Ellie. Rowan had already decided what could go into the reports, and the radio station in Alt Creek handled the mail before it went south. So I wrote about coming home, and I wrote that I would not let another person vanish without making the state hear about it. I left it there anyway. I folded the page and put it inside the envelope with Ellie's letter. The photographs stayed in my pack. The locked drawer beneath the radio desk held the private disappearance notes, the envelope of hair, and the map of the 3 cabins. I sealed it. I slept badly after sealing the envelope, and by morning the letter had gone soft at the fold, where I kept opening it and closing it again. February 27th was gray outside the lookout, with the kind of low cloud that made the ridgeline look closer than it was. I had just finished the morning weather report when a voice came through the radio.
Lookout station, this is Mary Fry.
I picked up the handset. Go ahead.
I've been assigned to measure the snowpack above the old mining road. My supervisor expects the measurements by Friday.
Her voice was clear and brisk, different from the people in Alt Creek who talked as if every sentence had to stay inside the valley. I looked at the west ridge, where the upper slopes disappeared into cloud. You should know that 3 people have disappeared here this winter, I said. None of them got a search. There was a pause. I could hear static behind her.
State credentials require the town to receive and file my report,
she said.
I have to complete the assignment.
That won't make them search for you.
I didn't ask them to search for me.
She said she planned to leave for Boise when the pass reopened, then asked where she could stay until the measurements were finished. I gave her directions to the rented cabin near the west ridgeline and marked the route on the station map. The cabin was close enough to reach by snowmobile, but not close enough that I could hear anything happen there. Keep the radio on, I told her. Call every hour.
I will.
The first check-in came on time. Mary said the snow near the west ridge was deeper than the posted measurements, and that the drift had built up along the north side of the slope. She sounded more interested than concerned. The second call came an hour later. She gave me another depth reading and said the wind had shifted across the upper ridge. I wrote the numbers down in my notebook, along with the time, then looked at the map until the pencil marks stopped looking like anything useful. During the third transmission, her voice came through with more static.
I'm heading back to the cabin before the next storm,
She said.
The west face is getting worse.
Call when you get there.
I said I was returning to the cabin before the storm.
The radio clicked, and the channel went quiet. I waited for the next call anyway. I checked the clock twice, then went outside and looked down the road. Snow had started falling against the windows, light at first and then heavier, with the flakes moving sideways whenever the wind reached the lookout. When the next hour passed, I called the cabin. Mary, this is the lookout. Check in. Nothing came back. I tried again after a few minutes, then a third time. The radio only gave me static. I knew what Rowan would say if I reported it. He would use whiteout or exposure walk-off, whichever one made the paperwork easier. I also knew Mary had been the first person from outside the valley to question the missing person reports. I took the snowmobile without asking Rowan. The ride to the West Ridge took most of the morning. The trail markers were half buried, and twice I had to stop and find the road beneath the drifts. By the time I reached the cabin, the storm had moved in over the trees and the light had gone flat. Mary's front door stood open. I killed the engine and listened. The snowmobile ticked as it cooled, and somewhere above the cabin the wind pushed loose snow over the roof. I walked to the door without calling her name. Her survey notebook was open by the radio. The pages had curled at the corners from the heat, and several columns of measurements filled the paper in a tight, careful hand. The instrument case sat on the floor near the table. It was still closed. Outside the doorway, the snow was smooth. No tracks led to the cabin or away from it. Mary had left to measure the ridge and had returned, or something had returned without using the path. I had seen that kind of clean snow before. The drift along the north wall rose above the lower windows. At first it looked like wind-packed snow, but I walked around the cabin and saw the shape it made. The bank had been pressed tight against the logs and curved upward toward the eaves, as if something had climbed it from inside the cabin and gone over the roof. The snow continued across the roofline in a raised strip. It didn't spread with the wind. It had a direction. 3 parallel gouges marked the siding above the packed drift. They rose above my head, cut into the logs with enough force to leave the wood splintered around the edges. One coarse gray strand had frozen in the pitch between 2 of the marks. I watched the marks without moving for a while. The hair matched the strand I had found at Evelyn's cabin. So did the gouges. The same height, the same spacing, the same damage to the logs. I knew what I had found, even if I didn't have a word that belonged in a report. I took photographs of the wall, the drift, the open doorway, and the snow around the cabin. Then I radioed Rowan. He answered after several seconds.
Maurice,
Mary Fry is missing.
where are you?
At the West Ridge cabin. The door is open. Her notebook and instrument case are inside. There are no tracks.
You will describe her as lost in a whiteout.
The drift is packed against the wall from inside. It rises to the eaves.
Maurice, you will use the whiteout report.
There are 3 gouges in the siding above the drift. The channel went quiet.
Are you refusing a direct instruction?
Rowan asked. The records I wrote are the truth. I'll send the photographs to the state myself when the relay opens. His voice became flatter after that.
The relay will not matter. Alt Creek controls the only functioning radio station, and the pass is closed.
I'll still send them.
You will return to the lookout.
I looked at the cabin again. The notebook was still open on the table, and the radio beside it was silent.
No one else is going to Mary's cabin,
Rowan said.
You will return directly.
I started the snowmobile and turned it away from the west ridge. The lookout was behind me, but I didn't take the trail back to it. Instead, I turned the machine toward Keith Lawrence's ranch. Even though the road was narrowing under the storm and the lookout was behind me. The ranch sat below the Sawtooth ridgeline, and I could see the upper slopes through the falling snow whenever the trees opened up. I had been there once before, but I had never gone back because I trusted Keith. I went because Alt Creek was protecting something, and I needed to know what it was. Keith was standing beside the ranch house when I arrived. He wore his oilskin coat and battered felt hat, and he looked past me toward the west ridge before looking at the photographs tucked inside my jacket.
You shouldn't have come here,
He said. Mary is missing.
I know.
The answer made me shut off the snowmobile. The engine stopped, but the wind kept moving around the buildings and driving snow over the packed yard. You knew she was going to disappear? Keith looked at the ridge again. He always did that before saying something he didn't want the valley to hear, although there was nobody else outside with us.
Come inside, Maurice.
I followed him through the front door. The house smelled like wood smoke, damp wool, and old cooking grease. Keith took off his hat and set it on a chair, then stood with both hands pressed against the edge of the kitchen table.
Tell me what happened,
He said. I took out the photographs and spread them across the table. The open door, the notebook, the drift piled beside the north wall, the 3 gouges in the siding with the gray hair caught in the pitch. Keith looked at each one without touching them. When he got to the wall, his face changed in a way I couldn't quite place. It wasn't surprise. It was the look of somebody seeing a bill he had expected in the mail.
The thing lives in the deep snow,
He said.
It moves under it, and it moves across the top of it. Doesn't break the surface, doesn't leave tracks.
What thing? He rubbed one thumb along the table's edge.
The thing.
I'd spent 6 days writing down facts I couldn't explain, and I was tired of people giving me a word instead of an answer. What does that mean?
It comes to the cabins below the ridges. When the drifts reach the walls, it can get in.
Through the doors.
Not through the doors.
Keith turned to the window. The ridgeline was hidden now, but the snow kept passing across the glass in thin white sheets.
My father took me to see the first one in the winter of 1951.
He said.
A man the town had left in the snow. I was young enough to think my father would tell me it was an accident. He didn't.
What did you see?
The snow had climbed the cabin wall, same as Evelyn's, same as Francis's. The man was gone, and there were no tracks anywhere around the place.
I looked down at Mary's cabin in the photograph. The town chose them. Keith didn't answer right away. He moved the photograph of the drift farther from the edge of the table, as if it might fall.
3 people, every hard winter,
He said.
Families choose them. Sick people, old people, anyone who doesn't have somebody strong enough to object.
Evelyn was old.
She was.
Francis lived alone.
Yes.
Orion was a child. Keith lowered his head.
The Hallorans were supposed to bank enough snow around their cabin. They didn't.
The stove clicked behind me, and I could hear the wind pressing against the outside walls. Orion was still inside, I said.
He was working at the table.
The duck. Keith nodded.
Half carved. He left it there.
What happened to him?
The arrangement failed. The thing took him instead.
I put both hands on the photographs. And the Hallorans?
They tried to avoid it.
Did it take them too? Keith looked at me then.
They were harmed after.
He said it carefully, but he didn't say how. The clean snow, the warm cabins, the people who were gone without opening a door. I knew that whatever happened inside the Halloran cabin, it hadn't been someone simply walking into the weather. Rowan knew, I said.
Rowan keeps the records.
He told me to write that Orion walked into the weather.
That's what the records say.
The records are false. Keith looked back at the photographs.
The records have to be false. If the thing believes the town is keeping the agreement, it leaves the healthy ones alone.
I felt anger then, plain and direct. It had been there since Evelyn's cabin, but I had kept it under the work and the cold and the need to keep moving. You leave people in their houses so it won't take children.
Not children, not healthy adults.
You don't get to make that distinction.
The town has no choice.
There is always a choice. Keith gave a tired shake of his head.
Smart men learned not to look for them.
That isn't the same as having no choice. He didn't argue with me. Mary became the fourth, I said. Keith's eyes moved to the photograph of the wall.
You refused to let the count close quietly.
I didn't do anything to Mary.
The town left her wall open to the drift,
So it could take her.
so the agreement would hold.
I gathered the photographs into a stack. I'm taking these to the state when the road opens. The photographs, my notes, and Mary's radio log.
The pass may not open.
It will eventually.
The next storm will close the ridge.
I put the photographs inside my jacket again. Then I'll wait for it to open. Keith's face tightened.
It won't stop at Mary's cabin. You refused the town's agreement. The thing will come for the lookout.
I thought of the cabin above the trees, the desk with the radio, and the wall on the north side, where wind had been pushing snow in the wrong direction for 6 days. How soon?
Before the next storm is finished.
I left the table and went back outside. The snow had thickened while we talked, and the sawtooth ridgeline had disappeared completely behind the weather. I secured the map and evidence beneath my coat, then started the snowmobile and drove toward the lookout before the ridge closed. When I reached the lookout, snow had covered the trail again, and daylight was fading. I had spent most of the day pushing the snowmobile up the winding road, stopping whenever the markers disappeared and backing up when the machine started to slide toward the drop. The map and camera were under my coat, along with the radio log and the drawer's disassembled pieces. I had taken the drawer apart before leaving the ranch and carried the pieces in my pack. I brought the rifle inside last. The station was cold enough that the metal door latch stuck to my glove, and the wind had filled the lower steps with loose snow. I shut the door, set the rifle beside the desk, and tried the state relay before taking off my coat. The signal came through in broken pieces. "State relay, this is the lookout station." Static answered me. Then another voice broke through, too faint to make out. I pressed the transmit button again. "This is Maurice Cross at the lookout station. I have photographs and records concerning 3 missing persons and..." The channel snapped into a hard burst of noise. I waited, then tried again. This time, someone answered. "Lookout station. Your location is listed as unmanned." "Who reported that?" The answer broke apart before I could hear it. I caught Rowan's name in the static. Then the relay went dead. I stayed with the handset against my ear for a while. It didn't. The antenna was already taking snow, and the storm kept pressing against the station walls hard enough to make the windows shake. I put the camera and the radio log in the locked drawer with the envelopes of gray hair, then set it under the desk. The photographs from Mary's cabin stayed in my coat. I slept for a few hours in my clothes. When I woke, the lantern had burned low and the room was almost dark. For a moment, I couldn't tell what had woken me. Then I heard a slow creaking sound above the ceiling, followed by a soft rush of snow against the wall facing north. I got out of the cot and went to the window. The drift had climbed past the lower frame and reached the eaves. It filled the space outside in a smooth white bank, higher than any drift that had formed around the lookout before. The wind had blown from the south all day. The wall on the sheltered side should have been scoured clean. That station was the only building on the ridge that had never been buried. I had watched snow pile against the other cabins, but this lookout always stayed exposed because of its position and the way the wind crossed it. This time the snow had come from the wrong side, and it had risen overnight as if somebody had packed it there by hand. I lit the lantern and checked the main room first. The door was still shut. The rifle stood beside the desk, and the radio gave off a weak red light even though the relay was gone. I checked the second room, then the small space by the rear wall where I kept the fuel. Nothing had changed inside. That was the part that frightened me. I had expected a broken window or a door pushed inward, something I could understand after it happened. Instead, both rooms looked exactly as they had before I went to sleep, while the snow outside had climbed almost to the roof. The propane heater ticked in the corner. The sound was small and regular, and I kept listening to it because it was the only thing in the room that behaved normally. I turned the lantern down, then killed it. Moonlight came through the windows in a dull blue strip. I took the rifle and stood beside the north window, keeping my shoulder against the wall. The storm had blocked the antenna, and when I lifted the radio and tried Alt Creek, there was nothing but static. The smell reached me before I heard anything else. It was the smell of a wet animal that had been shut inside somewhere warm. Underneath it was something sweeter, like meat left too long in a covered pan. I held my breath and waited for it to pass, but it stayed in the room and seemed to grow stronger. The roof settled above me. It wasn't the ordinary weight of snow. The whole ceiling gave a slow, heavy groan, and a line of powder sifted down through the boards beside the heater. I stepped away from the window and raised the rifle. More snow pressed across the roof. I could hear it moving across the boards, from the northern wall toward the center of the cabin. The pressure came down through the ceiling and into the floor beneath my boots. I went for the door, then stopped. The thing was above the lookout, and the door opened onto the drift. If I went outside, I would be standing in the same snow it used to move. The north window made a small cracking sound. A pale hand punched through the snow packed against the glass. It came through slowly, first the wrist and then the fingers, pressing against the window as if searching for the frame. The skin was gray and wet. Long fingers dragged across the glass, and coarse gray hair reached nearly to the knuckles. The nails were shaped like small chisels. At Evelyn's cabin, I had found that gray hair stuck in the pitch. The siding above Mary's drift bore the same marks. The hand moved across the window, feeling for a way through, and I understood that the gouges had not been made by an animal trying to get out. They had been made by something climbing in. I backed toward the wall beside the window and aimed at the heaviest part of the snow above it. The rifle shook once in my hands, but I held it there. Then I fired. The shot struck the wall and sent splinters through the room. The hand disappeared from the glass. Snow dropped from the ceiling in a thick sheet, and the pressure above me shifted toward the roof peak. I fired again. The cabin filled with smoke and the sharp smell of powder. The roof groaned harder, and something moved across it with a slow, dragging sound. I kept firing until the rifle was empty, and the thing released a long, tearing shriek that seemed to come from the roof, the walls, and the snow outside at the same time. The pressure lifted. Then the roof gave a heavy thump, and the mass fell away from the lookout. I reloaded before opening the door. The drift reached almost to the top of the frame, and I had to push through it with both hands. Snow went down the front of my coat and filled one of my boots. The moon had come out behind the storm for a few seconds. I saw a furrow moving away from the lookout, broad at first, and then narrowing as it crossed the ridge. The snow rose and settled around whatever moved beneath it. I watched for an opening. There wasn't one. The furrow filled smooth behind the retreating mass, leaving no tracks and no tunnel that I could follow. I went back inside and packed the rifle, the fuel, the radio log, the camera, and the envelopes containing gray hair onto the snowmobile. There wasn't room for the drawer, so I left it under the desk with the important papers already in my pack. The next pressure came against the roof before I finished fastening the last strap. I started the machine and began the winding descent while the storm still fell around me. The lookout disappeared behind the trees, but a raised line moved beneath the snow beside the snowmobile, keeping pace through the first turns before the surface closed over it again. The snowmobile kept moving beside the raised line until the trail dropped into the trees, and then the snow settled flat behind me. I drove for almost 3 hours without stopping, with the rifle across my legs and the camera, radio log, and private notes tucked beneath my jacket. By the time I reached Alt Creek, the sky had begun to pale. The general store had lights on in the front windows, and so did the constable's office and several of the ranch houses along the road. Nobody came outside to see me arrive. The town had always been better at watching from behind glass. I drove past the store once, then circled back and stopped behind it. The engine made a rough clicking sound when I shut it off. I took the rifle with me and walked to the rear door, where the snow had been shoveled down to the packed ground. I knocked with the butt of the rifle. For a while, nothing happened. Then Keith opened the door a few inches and looked out at me. His white hair was uncovered, and the light from inside made his face look even more tired than it had at the ranch.
You made it,
he said. Open the door. He looked at the rifle, then moved aside. I carried it in and stepped into the store's back room. Sacks of flour and feed were stacked against one wall, and the air smelled like coffee, dust, and cold wood. Keith shut the door and pushed the bolt across it.
Rowan is at the office,
he said.
He knows you're here.
I assumed he would. Keith took a kettle from the stove and poured coffee into a chipped cup. He set it on a crate without asking whether I wanted it. I didn't touch it. My hands were still stiff from the ride, and I didn't trust myself to hold anything hot.
The families have done this for 4 generations,
he said.
Banked snow against their own doors. Every cabin. Every winter when the drifts come high enough.
So the thing can get in.
So it won't.
He kept his eyes on the cup.
It doesn't enter the houses with young people in them. Healthy people. Not when the agreement is kept.
I had heard him call it an agreement at the ranch, but hearing the word in the store made it sound more organized than the cabins and the snow had looked. It sounded like there had been meetings and decisions and people writing things down. 3 people disappear, I said. Then the rest of the town stays safe.
3 people every hard winter.
Evelyn, Francis, Orion. Keith nodded after each name.
The count has to hold.
And Mary? He rubbed both hands over his face.
Mary became the 4th because you refused to sign the report.
I didn't make the town leave her cabin open.
You made the arrangement visible.
The arrangement was already visible.
Not to the state.
He said it quietly, like that was supposed to matter more than what happened to Mary. I felt angry again, but I was too tired to raise my voice, and Keith had already told me the truth. He was one of the few people in Alt Creek who still did that. Rowan's job is the paperwork, I said.
Rowan's job is to keep outsiders from learning what happens here. He calls it exposure walk-off, whiteout, lost on the road, whatever makes the report close.
He knew Mary would be taken.
Yes.
He knew about Evelyn.
Yes.
Francis and Orion, too. Keith watched the bolted door.
Everyone who needed to know.
The front bell rang. Keith went still, He didn't reach for the rifle because I was already holding it, and he didn't need to tell me to stay quiet. Footsteps moved through the store, followed by the scrape of the front door closing. Rowan appeared in the doorway with 2 ranchers behind him. I didn't know either of the ranchers, but I knew they had come prepared to stand there and make the town's decision look larger than one man's. Rowan wore his brown coat and badge, and there was snow on his shoulders.
You will put the rifle down.
He said. No.
You will surrender the photographs and all copies of your records.
No. One of the ranchers shifted his weight. The other kept watching where I'd tucked the camera case. Rowan's face stayed flat.
No charges will be filed if you leave Idaho today and don't name Alt Creek outside the county.
I won't give up the evidence. Keith stood near the stove with his hands at his sides.
No one here will testify, Maurice.
I looked at him.
The state will treat it as a winter accident,
He said.
They won't believe the story without witnesses.
The photographs show the walls.
They'll say the wind made the marks.
The radio log shows Mary checked in.
They'll say the storm interrupted the transmission.
The records I wrote are the truth. Rowan took one step into the room.
Truth isn't the same as evidence a court will accept.
I had spent the night firing into snow and listening to the roof move above me. The smell of the thing was still inside my coat, or maybe it was only in my head, but I could still taste the powder from the rifle. Rowan looked as if he had come from a warm office where he had slept. Mary refused the report too, I said. You knew what would happen. Rowan's jaw tightened.
Mary was outside the approved route during a whiteout.
She was returning to her cabin.
You don't know that.
I heard her say it. He didn't answer that. The 2 ranchers looked at the floor. Keith took a folded paper from his coat and placed it on the crate beside the coffee.
Take this.
I opened it. The paper was an order ending my lookout posting, with my name typed near the top and Rowan's signature at the bottom. The wording said I was relieved of duty because of unsafe conduct and failure to follow direct instructions. Rowan set a metal fuel can beside the paper.
Enough to get you beyond the pass.
You're running me out.
You are being removed from a position you can no longer perform.
You want the camera.
I want the materials that could damage this town.
I put the order inside my coat. Rowan held my gaze for a long moment.
You will never say the valley's name outside the county.
I'll say what happened.
You will leave Idaho and keep your mouth shut.
I won't. He nodded once.
Then you can explain to the state why you abandoned your post during a storm and endangered the search operation.
There was no search operation.
That is not what the report will say.
Keith turned away from us. The 2 ranchers still hadn't looked at me. I picked up the fuel can and walked through the store toward the rear door. My body felt heavy from the ride, and my fingers had started to ache as they warmed. I secured the can behind the seat, then checked the camera and the notes inside my coat. The rifle went across my lap. Keith came outside before I started the engine.
You should leave before daylight,
He said. I am.
The road will be worse above the pass.
I know. He looked past the buildings toward the ridgeline, though they blocked most of it.
You may never know whether the thing accepts another person this winter.
I know that.
You may never know if Evelyn, Francis, Orion, or Mary are recovered.
I looked at him. Were any of them recovered? He didn't answer. That was the answer I had expected, but it still made me feel sick. I had gone back to the cabins, written the reports, and kept the names in my notes because I thought records could hold a person in place until somebody came looking. Rowan had built the records to do the opposite. Keith stepped away from the snowmobile.
Don't come back here, Maurice.
I started the engine. The fuel caught cleanly, and the machine shook under me. For a few seconds, I watched the store's rear door close and the light disappear around its edges. Then I drove out of Alt Creek. I spent most of the next day getting out of Alt Creek, and when I reached Boise, the snow had turned to rain. I left the snowmobile with the state equipment and drove home in a truck that smelled like wet canvas and old coffee, carrying the rifle, the fuel can, and the few records I had managed to keep. Ellie's divorce papers were waiting on the kitchen table. She had sent them before I left for the lookout, and I had carried them from one place to another without opening the envelope. The paper had softened at the corners, and there was a dark mark from where a cup had sat on it. I signed where she had marked the lines. I didn't call her afterward. I didn't explain the lookout, the photographs, or why I had left the fire service instead of taking another post at a station or joining a wildfire crew. I couldn't tell her that every wall covered in snow brought back the sound of something moving above it. That wasn't the whole reason, but it was the part I knew how to say. She wrote again later and asked why I hadn't told the state what happened there. I read the letter at the kitchen table and put it back in the envelope. I read it a second time that night. I never answered it. The years after that were not dramatic. That was probably the worst part. I found work, moved between apartments, and eventually bought the house in Boise. I stopped carrying a radio. I stopped taking jobs that involved lookout towers, mountain roads, or long periods where nobody could reach me. I told people I preferred work closer to town, which was true enough to keep them from asking more questions. The photographs lasted longer than most things. So did the radio log and the pages I had written about Evelyn, Francis, Orion, and Mary. I kept them in a box beneath clothes I no longer wore, then in a filing cabinet, then in a locked case after I decided the box was too easy to lose. I never went back to Alt Creek, and I never warned the state. I knew what the state would do with the information. It would put the photographs in a file, call the marks weather damage, and let Rowan's report stand because official paper was easier to believe than a wall that moved. Keith had told me nobody would testify, and he had been right about that much. When I got sick, I started recording the confession. I used the small recorder on my desk because it was easier than writing. My hands had begun to shake, and the first pages were hard to read afterward. I said where it happened. I said what the town had done. I said that Rowan Jensen kept the false records, and that Keith Lawrence knew the arrangement was real. I named Evelyn, Francis, Orion, and Mary. I said Mary had become the price of my refusal to sign the report. I said I had never gone back. I said I had never warned the state. The photographs and radio log were gone by then. I had kept them until the evidence was destroyed with my other belongings, though I couldn't remember the exact day it happened. There had been a move, and then a house fire in the storage unit. And then years when I told myself I would recover what could be recovered. By the time I stopped saying that, there was nothing left to recover. The recording was the only thing that remained. I made it again when I finished, because the first time I had spoken too quietly and the machine lost several words. On the second recording, I gave the names more slowly. I repeated the facts when I reached them, the way I had done in the reports Rowan refused to accept. The records I wrote were the truth. I didn't say that on the recording because it sounded like something meant for another person. I had spent too long trying to make other people hear it. By then, I only needed the words to exist somewhere outside me. That February, shortly before I died, I woke late at night to snow pressing against the outside wall. At first I thought it was the furnace. The house made a lot of small noises when the heat came on, and I knew most of them. The pipes clicked. The vent under the window rattled. Sometimes the refrigerator shook hard enough to make the glasses in the kitchen cabinet touch each other. This sound was different. It moved slowly across the wall, beginning near the bedroom window and pressing toward the corner. There was no strong wind outside. The trees in the yard were still, and the weather report had said the storm would pass south of Boise. I had checked it before going to bed because I still checked weather reports, even though nobody expected one from me anymore. I got up and walked to the window. The streetlights made the falling snow look yellow. Cars sat along the curb with white roofs, and the houses across the street were dark except for one porch light. Nothing moved between them. The snow was coming down almost straight. Then I heard the pressure against the wall again. It was not a scrape or a knock. It was the sound of weight being placed carefully against the house. The drywall gave a small creak beside the bed, and powder fell in a line onto the floor near the baseboard. I had seen it climb the walls of Evelyn's and Mary's cabins. I had watched it rise against the lookout from the wrong side, where the wind should have cleared it away. I knew it could move without leaving tracks. The rifle was gone from beside the bed. I had not owned one for years. The recorder sat on the desk in the next room with the confession inside it, and the house was too quiet for me to pretend that ordinary explanations would hold. I went to the desk and touched the recorder without turning it on. The snow pressed higher. I returned to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. The wall leaned inward by a fraction, or maybe the room was only old and I was too tired to trust what I saw. Outside, the snow reached the lower part of the window and kept rising. I stayed awake until morning, listening as it climbed higher against the wall.